Good evening and hello and welcome to African Perspective. I am Aldrin Sampear. Tonight on the show, we bring you a wide-ranging interview with Ugandan musician turned politician Bobi Wine, who is in South Africa to receive the African Freedom Prize for the Frederick Newman Foundation. You can send us your questions or comments to @Perspective1 on Twitter. But first, let's start here. Well, Ugandan opposition politician who started off as a musician, who became a politician, is in South Africa, as we've indicated during our headlines. That is Bobi Wine. What intrigues me is what inspires his brand of politics, the resilience, as well as his resolution to disrupt the political landscape of the East African country, which is Uganda. Wine is in South Africa to receive the African Freedom Prize from the Frederick Newman Foundation, and he joins us in studio. And you've thrown your name in the hat for the 2021 presidential race. Good evening and welcome to African Perspective.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. Good evening, viewers.
Why?
Why what?
Why did you throw your name in the hat?
Well, I thought it was necessary to rise to the occasion, having seen many of us, and by us I mean the generation, many of fellow young men and women in Uganda, so apathetic, so disconnected, and so less concerned about how they are governed. And I decided to encourage them, not by word, but by action. So I decided to, to demonstrate, not to explain. Yeah.
What inspires your politics? Before we're going to take a step back into understanding who Robert, who became Bobi Wine, is. But currently, we know you as a politician. What is it that inspires your politics?
First of all, I must say, like I've been saying in the past, that I would rather not be identified as a politician, because that vulgarizes the entire thing. I did not start off as a politician, and I would rather be seen as one of the very many young men and women in Uganda who saw it necessary to rise to the occasion. Now, you ask what inspires me. I look at this as a result. I look at my involvement in our politics as a result of desperation, not inspiration. It was frustration. It was the apathy. It was the failure of seeing those people that we expected to stand in for us, not standing in. So I realized that it was our time to rise to the occasion and remember that we are on our own. That's where I come from. Okay,
I'm going to take a step back again. So you mentioned that you don't want to be referred to as a politician because it vulgarizes?
Yeah, sure. You see, in the past, I'm one of the very many young people who detested politics, because politics in Uganda and very many parts of Africa has been reduced to lies and manipulation of the voters, and that explains why so many people have been disconnected from the fact that they've been disconnected from the way that they have been governed. However, that has been to a large extent to the detriment of Ugandans, until we realize that we who were young yesterday are now the fathers, the mothers, and we are soon going to be the grandfathers and grandmothers. So that is why we decided to look at it as reality, not as politics.
But isn't it that when you enter the space, then you become a politician? Like being a member of parliament then makes you a politician?
Yeah, sure. Ordinarily, it is known as being a politician. But like many people have been saying in the past, and I agree with them, that politics is so serious a business to be left to the politicians. You know, I wanted to encourage the millions upon millions of people, especially the young people back home, to know that you actually don't have to be a politician to play an active part in bettering our society.
No, that totally makes sense. So let's take a few steps back. About 37 years ago, you were born. What are your earliest memories of Uganda?
Well, I was born in a Uganda, that was troubled. I was born during the war that President Museveni started, which war got so many Ugandans involved, including my grandfather and my father and some of our elder brothers, and indeed many of, not just my family members, but many noble Ugandans lost their lives and livelihood in that war. So when President Museveni took over, I was 4 years old, one of those young children that hoped to live in a better Uganda, as promised by the Museveni group, which included our grandfathers and fathers. Unfortunately, their dreams and aspirations were betrayed by the very man that they trusted. 34 years later, the man who claimed that Africa's problem was leaders that overstay in power does not want to hear of anybody mentioning him leaving power. You know, 34 years later, the man who castigated corruption is the chief priest of corruption. 34 years later, a man who detested tribalism and sectarianism is the chief priest of that. So that is a Uganda that we've grown up in. But I would rather not capitalize, I would rather not dwell so much on the failures and the optimistic side and the pessimistic side. I'd rather look at it optimistically and say, okay, the Uganda that I live in right now is a Uganda full of young people, talented young people, very united, very knowledgeable, very resourceful, only waiting for us, coming together and agreeing on the path that we want to take as a generation, then going ahead and taking that path.
Was it ever explained to you why you lost family members? This is now as a young boy.
Well, it doesn't have to be explained to me as a person. It is widely known by our generation that indeed many of our mothers, fathers, uncles, parents lost their lives in a struggle to make life better for we, the future generation. Right now, we are that generation that they always looked at. We are the grandchildren of that independence generation and the grandparents of the future generation. So it is self-explanatory that a price has been paid. Every now and then when we go to the countrysides, we see mass graves as a result of that civil war that Museveni started. The war that was supposed to be a big sacrifice for us to leap into the future. So that is basically what we see.
What was explained to you about Idi Amin?
Well, we know that Idi Amin was a dictator. We know that Idi Amin was ruthless. We know that Idi Amin had no respect for human rights. But we also know that Idi Amin had his country at heart. And yes, Idi Amin put so much infrastructure and so much development that we still look at today. However, if I was to draw a comparison between President Museveni and Idi Amin, I would say the major difference between President Museveni and Idi Amin is that President Museveni has been so smart and he has hidden and been able to divert his evils with utmost precision, and we always give it to him. However, in terms of rule of law, in terms of respect for human rights, in terms of brutality, I think President Museveni has outdone Idi Amin.
Yeah. What are some of those evils that you speak of from Idi Amin?
Well, the evils that we speak of from Idi Amin today is disrespect for human rights. Ugandans were killed during Idi Amin Day. Ugandans continue to be killed during Museveni's regime. Ugandans disappeared with never to be seen again in the Amin regime. Ugandans disappeared today, never to be seen during Idi Amin. Ugandans were, extrajudicially killed during Idi Amin's reign. The same thing is happening today. Idi Amin declared himself life president, and he was president for 8 years. President Museveni did not directly declare himself a president for life.
But you would say that his actions do point to that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And one of those actions being the amendment of the Constitution.
Yeah, the amendments of the Constitution.
Yeah,
because it has been amended every now and then to suit the agenda of the president.
Yeah. But what do the politicians then in Uganda say about his governance, about Museveni's governance?
Well, I would rather mention what the people of Uganda say, not what the politicians say. Because yes, much as the politicians always speak out, but I listen mainly from the common people, the ordinary people. They want better, they want freedom, they want their voices to be heard, they want their votes to count, they want to be humans, to have the full dignity of citizenship of Uganda, which is not the case today.
But if that's the case, then why do they keep on voting him back in power? This is his 5th term in power, and seemingly he would be running for the 2021 elections.
Well, the voting him, I am not sure about it, as it has been widely believed that President Museveni has been defeated on the vote countless times. But of course, he has always deployed the military to rig the election blatantly. Right now, I am running against President Museveni, but I cannot even be allowed to, attend a radio or TV interview, especially in the rural areas. I cannot be allowed to show up in the public. I cannot be allowed to address a rally. That is how President Museveni runs Uganda, with an iron hand.
How do you think things will be different in 2021?
Well, I think things are not just going to be different in 2021. Things are already different. We're living in a highly connected young population. We connect through social media. We connect through various means. We call it a rubber dub style. We are young people, very, very different from the older generation that is evidently disconnected from our style of doing things. So we know that we were blocked from the traditional means, but we have our different means of connecting. That explains why our communications are always connecting to our people. Right now I'm in South Africa, speaking on SABC, but you can be sure millions upon millions of people in Uganda are hearing me, and this is how we've been able to communicate to them.
But weren't there concerns back in 2016 and in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, that there were internet cuts?
Yeah, there always been.
So that's why I keep on going back to this question. What will be different in 2021?
Well, it's going to be different. Why? Because we have massively sensitized our people. It's not going to be politics as usual.
What does that mean?
Like we were saying, our people have been apathetic about the politics, almost beaten down, almost resigned to, fate, knowing that President Museveni cannot be challenged, especially since all the people that have been challenging him in the past are his generation and have been using the traditional means. Now, here comes a young man from a totally different generation from him, very connected with my fellow young men and women. And it's not only young people, but all people as well. So this time around, it is not for the politicians. It is Museveni versus the people of Uganda.
But Bobi, what is tangibly different to this new form of politics that you speak of? The vibrancy of the young people, sure, we can speak about that. But the systems are still there, the institutions are still there, and President Museveni is still in control of those institutions. So what is it about this new form of politics that would disrupt the political landscape?
Well, one would be justified to think that President Museveni is in firm control of the system until we give him or her examples of the recent challenges that we've given President Museveni and indeed beaten him at his own game. For example, when I was running in Chadondo East constituency, more than 8 billion shillings of taxpayers' money was deployed against me in that small constituency. We beat President Museveni. The same thing happened constantly in Jinja, in Bujiri, in Rukunjiri, and in Arua. How did we do it? By doing it the ordinary way, sensitizing people, because we believe that there's no magic. Once people come out in massive numbers, vote and protect their vote, it turns things around. Now that we did in these 5 constituencies, we intend to do massively in 450 constituencies all over Uganda, and that is going to be game over for President Museveni.
Do you think that what you're speaking about now would also trickle down to the 80% of the population which is below 35 years old, that they find a reflection in themselves when they see, for instance, the visuals that we're looking at now, right behind us? There you have young people coming out in their numbers, seemingly celebrating. Is this what the 80% of the under 35-year-olds in Uganda see? This is now the 80% of the population which is under 35, that they see that this is what we aspire to be.
Sure. Like I've always been saying, I am only a reflection of the aspirations of those young people. More than 80% younger than me, more than 80% unemployed, more than 80% they've never seen another president, and yes, more than 80% share the same vision that we share as a generation. So this is a mass exodus from the old into the new, from the impossible to the possible. And that is exactly what gives us the confidence that this is going to be done.
Controversial remarks that you once made against the LGBTI community. And there's a question here that we have from Sibonelo, who says, where does he stand when it comes to protecting the rights of the LGBTIQ persons in the country, or should he be president? I think also, or why he should be president. I think that's probably the question.
Well, as president, I think one has the responsibility of guarding the rights of all citizens, those that are like you and those that are not like you. And I believe as a leader, a high level of tolerance is required to make sure the nation comes together.
Tolerance, or is it tolerance, or is it acceptance?
I believe in tolerance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about the LGBTQI community?
I think that all human beings are human beings and all rights are rights. Yeah.
So would you then move forward to speak about the acceptance of the LGBTI community instead of tolerance? Because tolerance sounds a bit different. Tolerance says, I must tolerate this person who I don't agree with, who I don't like, so I must tolerate this person.
Well, I believe that leadership and indeed respect for rights is the ability to guard one's right even when you don't agree with them. You know, one leader once said that I might not agree with you, but I'll guard your right to stand to stand by your position with my life. And I believe that's what leadership is all about.
So you don't believe in the LGBTI community?
Well, I believe in respect for everybody. There are very many people that we are alike and we are not alike. Yeah. But so these people,
does it mean respect even though you don't agree with?
Even though you don't agree with somebody, I think respect and of one's rights, even to disagree with you, is very important.
Okay, so if you want to also send us your comments and your tweets, you can do that by using the hashtag SABC News, and also tweet at African Perspective 1, that is on Twitter, at African Perspective 1. We're in conversation with Bobi Wine, who is a Ugandan musician, doesn't want to be called a politician. We're having conversation as he is here in the country to receive that Frederick Norman Award that will be taking place later on this week. We're also having a wide-ranging conversation about various aspects that affected the continent. So your tweets at African Perspective 1, and you can use the hashtag SABC News. One of the biggest issues that are facing the continent is unemployment, and your country being one of those countries as well that is affected by the unemployment rate. Give us the unemployment rate as it stands currently, and have you been able to track what has happened over the years? Because when Museveni came in, it was said that there was 0% foreign direct investment, and then at some point it came to $1.2 billion in foreign direct investment. Then what happened?
Well, in Uganda, development and our economy has just been to the masses, just statistics, but realistically it does not reflect with the people. For example, one would be right to say that the economy is literally owned by just one family or Museveni and his cronies. It does not translate to the people out there. Why? Because there's so much exclusion, there's so much corruption, and you know, there's no regard of you know, qualification whatsoever. One is not appointed to a job because of their quality or because of their merit, but because of what tribe they come from or what their second name is. And most importantly, our education system, which has been reduced to just job seekers, not job creators. And sadly, and very sadly so, we've ended up having to export, you know, unskilled labor, housemaid, and so on, while we import doctors. So I believe that our education system itself is paramount in transforming this. An education system, for example, that would not capitalize on only academics, but in a quick analysis would capitalize on the 3 A's. That's the academics, the arts, and the athletics, which we are very enormously gifted with. Very many angles to tackle unemployment. For example, Uganda is an enormously gifted place, you know, for agriculture. Agriculture has historically been the backbone of our economy, but it's not revamped. I believe that if these factors are looked into and planned about and budgeted for as necessitated, as well researched, I think it would be a good transformation for us.
Should the education minister take blame for that?
Well, our education minister is the wife of the president. And I've said it before that her own education has been questioned. So that alone is a question to be answered massively by us. Yeah.
And what is the answer?
The answer is change. The answer is, you know, replacing this, you know, all-knowing and all-powerful leadership to servant leadership. We have a leadership that is both our president, who is the husband of the Minister of Education, was recently on a public gathering and said he's nobody's servant. He's supposed to be our servant. That's the only way he's going to be accountable to us.
Do you think it's arrogance?
I think it's extreme power. This guy has been in power for over 34, for close to 34 years, completely disconnected from reality. He does not feel accountable. He feels like he's a certain God somewhere. So, yeah, it is, for lack of a better word, arrogance.
Okay. We're in conversation with Bobi Wine, as we've indicated, and if you want to be part of the conversation, you can tweet us at Aldrin Sampear, and also use the hashtag SABC News, and tweet at tweet at African Perspective 1. That's at African Perspective 1. And remember that you can also live stream this interview on the SABC News channel on YouTube that is currently streaming live. We continue the conversation just after this ad break and take in a broader perspective of what's currently happening on the continent.
You've got people salivating in my ear between my director and everybody else at the back.
This is Morning Live.
This is definitely going to be a special project.
So I wanted to create an awareness in Igama about the experiences that black women face on a daily basis that they either can't speak about or they tuck away in their memory.
The more and more women are wanting fit bodies for life, no matter their shape or size, we've been able to tap into that amazing energy.
Police in Mahikeng have their hands full stopping residents from looting shops in the Mahikeng Central Business District.
As you can see behind me, it's pandemonium here in Mahikeng. The masses are trying to break the hold of the police to go into these shops and possibly loot them. And there we have it, the separation. Wow, oh, look, 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 look. The police are trying their very best to control the crowd here. He's saying that it's better for them to go in there and take the stock before it is wasted in the fire.
The exact cause of the fire is still unknown, but electrical fault is suspected.
This must be a major knock for the economy of this area because this is an economic hub of Mahikeng.
Our town is very small. When the shops are burned down, our people are really going to suffer economically, and employment is also going to suffer because most of the people are working in these shops.
Welcome back to African Perspective with me, Aldrin Sampear. And just a reminder that we're in conversation with Bobi Wine, Ugandan politician. Sorry, not politician. Doesn't want to be called a politician, but he is in the work of politics to try and save his country from the governance of the president, Museveni, who's been in power for the past 34 years. And at the time when he became president of the country, this is 1986. Bobi was only 4 years old. If you want to be part of the conversation, you can tweet me at Aldrin Sampear and tweet at African Perspective 1. And remember that we can also live stream this conversation on the SABC News channel. Let's go a bit further. Now that we started earlier on the question around foreign direct investment, and you've raised concerns around the governance of the country. And did you use the word dictatorship?
Well, that is the word. Whether I use it or not, that is the word.
Okay. What about the role of countries that are trading with Uganda? What role is it that they should be playing when it comes to human rights and the abuse or alleged abuse of humans or human rights in Uganda?
For starters, I'm thankful that our fellow citizens of Africa, of the world, see it necessary and important to engage with Uganda. We are amazing people. We're such a lovely and, you know, profitable group of people to work with.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. But again, it has always been our prayer to all the people, all the countries, and all the organizations that cooperate with Uganda. I mean, besides just business, besides being attracted to us for business, come to us as brothers and sisters, knowing that we are humans like you, and you know, hold our leaders accountable and make the observation of human rights and respect for the rule of law as a precondition for cooperation, because these are things that bind us together. These are values that we hold so close. These are the first things that are supposed to unite us, and anything else will.
In the absence of that precondition of human rights?
In the absence of precondition of human rights, I think these other countries and organizations would be partners in crime. You know, there's absolutely no reason why a country or an organization should deal with a criminal government. And a government that does not respect the rights of its citizens, and a government that does not respect the laws of the land, and a government that is behaving gangster is a criminal government. And anybody that deals with a criminal government is a partner in crime.
So then, would you then say that some of the big foreign traders in Uganda that trade with Uganda, the likes of Kenya, China, South Africa, for instance, that those countries are culpable?
Yeah, we've raised it on so many platforms. We've raised it with development partners. We've raised it with the African Union, and yes, we've raised it with the United States, especially with the United States and Europe. We've asked them to invoke their Global Magnitsky Act, which is clamps down to officials that relate with the United States administration that are culpable for corruption and abuse of human rights. We've asked for sanctions and visa denials and so on. We are glad that, for example, the United States has denied visas for those officers, especially in the security organs, that have been culpable for the abuse of human rights and corruption. Mainly the former police chief that was indicted in the abuse of human rights, and very many other government officials that have been part and parcel of the abuse of human rights. All we are asking is that we want more of that. We want the administration in Uganda to know that it is not oppressing its people in the dark. We want them to know that they are accountable to the global treaties that they sign. They must respect and dignify their people, because it's ultimately about the people, not them as leaders.
The plea for sanctions, who did you make that to?
Come again?
The plea for sanctions.
Yeah, the plea for sanctions, we've made them to all leaderships and organizations all over the world, and even right now in South Africa. Even right now in South Africa, I'm making that plea. Like I said, we don't only focus or look for the audience of the politicians, but even the citizens. I was telling the American citizens recently that it's their taxpayers' money that is actually being moved. The politicians don't have their personal money. It is taxpayers' money that is being used. And I'll be very glad if I hear the people of South Africa holding the administration here accountable in terms of their foreign policy, especially in terms of Uganda and other African countries that are equally misruled, just like Uganda, because we have a number of them on the African continent.
Do you think that's possible, though, sanctions from South Africa's perspective? Because the South African government is quite averse to sanctions, because the examples that they would make, for instance, is that once you impose sanctions on the country, it's not only the government that gets affected, but it's the people of that country that gets affected. The example being Zimbabwe as well.
Well, I must remind the people of South Africa, and indeed the administration of South Africa, that we as Uganda and many other African countries actually put sanctions on South Africa during the apartheid regime. So whenever there's misrule of people, it is a moral obligation for any other country, for any other group of people to stand with the oppressed people. Ugandans are being oppressed. So South Africa cannot turn a blind eye. They're supposed to be their brothers' keepers, their sisters' keepers.
The African Union?
Well, the same message goes to the African Union as well. Yeah.
What do you feel, or what do you think even about the African Union, and even its the power that it holds, the influence that it holds? Some people call it a boys' club, for instance. That you would speak, for instance, about someone like President Museveni, who's been in power for close to 34 years. And it is the same African Union that keeps on inviting him back over and over and over again. And nobody knows if there's any conversation amongst the 54 countries that are saying to Museveni that, listen, I think you have overstayed your welcome. One of the examples being in Zimbabwe as well, with Robert Mugabe. They failed there. What are the chances of that happening in Uganda?
Well, to the African Union, and not only the African Union, I'll start down, going up. I mean, we have the East African community that we have many times called upon to seize coming off as a president's club. You know, let it not be about the leaders, let it be about the people of East Africa. The African Union is not supposed to be a president's club. It's not supposed to be a big boys club. It's supposed to be a club of Africans. You know, it's supposed to be addressing what uplifts Africans, not what uplifts those that rule over us. And that should remind them that it does not end with us, but it affects our credibility as Africa internationally. It's really disheartening for the people of Africa to be seeking redress from the foreign, to be seeking redress from Europe or America or these other countries. We have Africa, we have elders in Africa, we have examples to learn from. You know, we cannot have had the great Nelson Mandela go through what he went through, and not having our leaders learn from that. We must learn from our experiences and better ourselves.
Do you think that what we're seeing happening on the continent is that the failure of heads of state on the continent to have that conversation with their peers, to say that, hey, listen, think that you've overstayed your welcome, maybe step aside, that young people are actually now taking up that role? Look at what has happened in Algeria, look at what has happened in Sudan as well.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to be judgmental by calling it the failure of African leaders to call their co-leaders to order. I would call it the delay of African leaders to call them to order. Because be sure, my brother, they will call them to order, whether as a result of morality or as a result of pressure. They will surely call them to order. But again, that has caused the young people of Africa to rise to the occasion, having looked on both sides, forward and behind, and we realize that nobody is going to represent our interests. Nobody is going to represent our aspirations, but ourselves. So it is us to rise to the occasion and shape our destiny, because we are still living here long enough to either suffer from the wrong decisions that we make or enjoy the good decisions that we make. So it is our time as a young people to rise to the occasion, and that has been mainly fueled by the delay, not failure, but the delay of our elders to do what they must do.
Do you think there could be, you say rise up, I say an uprising in Uganda?
Well, there is an uprising, not could be. There is an uprising. My rise is an example. I mean, I'm an artist who was comfortable in my world, singing and dancing and having fun, until I realized that, hey, you know, it's getting too late. And that is not just me. Many other young men and women, the doctors, the lawyers, the farmers, the border riders, the casual laborers, very many other people. So there is already an uprising, a psychological uprising. Yes.
Would it ever get physical, where the president is pushed out of office?
Well, with the president, it is already physical. As you notice how the police is reacting very violently. But for us, we decided to deal with them logically, well knowing that violence has its limitation, but logic will stand and stand forever.
Looking at those visuals, what are going through your mind? Do you remember this moment?
Man, I don't want to remember that moment. Yeah, I don't want to remember terrible moments. We go through a lot, we continue to go through a lot. But again, I must be quick to say that it's not just us. This is the little that gets to be seen on international TV. Lots and lots of even more grave human rights violations go on with our common people. And I'm standing here just to represent the millions upon millions of people that are affected.
Do you remember being beaten up by the police?
I get beat up every now and then. But not just me. People get beat up. People get killed. People disappear, never to be seen again. So it even puts my own, tribulations to shame, because it is very little. It is nothing compared to what my fellow other Ugandans go through. Those Ugandans that you will never see on TV, those Ugandans whose names will never be said in the mainstream media, those are the true heroes.
Do you fear for your life?
Of course I fear for my life. Of course I do. But it's just only one life. I'm struggling to make sure that we turn around more than 40 million lives. So my life, while I fear for it, it is nothing compared to the ultimate agenda that we have.
Do you think your daughter understands that?
Well, I know my daughter will understand that one day. Yeah.
But now she doesn't.
Right now, I think she tries to understand it, because, she will hug you and say, Daddy, you have to come back, you have to promise you come back. Yeah, and I will promise. And yes, God willing, I'll come back when I can, So while they go through so much challenge, as my children, I always tell them, as I've learned from the great leaders, that at least they are lucky to have a father that can still put food on the table. Other children have not had the opportunity of even sharing dinner with their fathers. So I'm one of the struggling fathers, and I've got to do what I've got to do, not just for my 4 children, but for the millions of other children that need my work desperately.
The leader of the Forum for Democratic Change, Kizza Besigye, said in an interview that Uganda has never seen a moment of peaceful transition of power. And based on what you've just said now, I wonder whether that will ever happen, even in 2021.
It is true.
Should you win the popular vote?
It is true, Uganda has never seen a peaceful transition of power. Since independence, it has been one group oppressing Ugandans after another, right from colonialism. But I believe that we can have a peaceful transition of power. I believe.
How? Where do you find this source of inspiration from, when you've just related, for instance, how maybe one day probably you won't be going back to your children, you won't be going back to your daughter?
But it has been there. I'll give an example, a live example of South Africa, where there seemed to be no hope of putting an end to the oppressive regime of apartheid, where the status quo seemed so strong, where the challenges, the old seemed insurmountable, where, even those foreign, nations that were supposed to morally stand with the people of South Africa didn't seem to stand with them. It came to pass, and here we are. We have seen dictatorships fall down. We've seen Yahya Jammeh of Gambia going. We've seen people that did not have the slightest speck of hope, turning around things. Like we were told by Obama that even in the face of insurmountable odds, people who love their nation can't change it. Man, you're talking about a nation that has close to 44 million people. More than 80% of these people are my age or younger. We share the same thought. We believe that, and it's practical belief. It's practical thought.
Who are the young politicians, political leaders on the continent that you look at and they are also a source of energy that springs you on to continue the fight?
Africa is full of very, very inspiring young people. Of course, we lost some of them in the past, like the great Thomas Sankara and so on. But today, in real time, we have, for example, here in South Africa, we have our brother Julius Malema, we have our comrade Nelson Chamisa, we have great leaders like the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abe, who just won a Nobel Peace Prize. We have great leaders to learn from here in Africa. But not only politicians. I've always been quick to remind people that it's not about the politicians. We have artists, we have singers, we have poets, we have business people that have raised their voices and challenged Africans to think beyond just the elective politics, to use their abilities, their influence, to channel people's minds to positively and productively.
And what is it? What is it about the strength of those artists? The ability to influence perspective and how people understand the world around them.
Well, I must say I'm personally greatly inspired by my fellow artist and fellow African Akon and his views about transforming Africa. And I believe that that can be done, and a few other people. Yeah.
When it comes to xenophobia, do you think that they could play a bigger role, a more influential role?
Sure. I believe that all of us as Africans can play a role. I think xenophobia is a terrible taint on the African, image. It's a terrible thing to be coming from Africa in this day and time. I think we all as Africans should regret it and condemn it in the, toughest terms possible. As Africans, we're supposed to look out for each other. This is a continent that was only divided involuntarily, not by us. It was not divided in Africa. It was divided by non-Africans sitting somewhere, So that should not have a spiritual and historical effect on us. And I want the brothers and sisters, the citizens of South Africa here, to be reminded that in their time of need, all of us as Africa stood with them. In Uganda, we had people, preparing to come liberate South Africa. We all stood with and for South Africans. And I want to remind the people of South Africa that the rest of Africans, many Africans, and primarily from Uganda, they don't come to South Africa, all these other countries, as refugees, economic or political, as a desire, but because it's not a right home. And it is the responsibility of the people of South Africa to stand with us back home so that we pacify, so that we fix the situation back home, to make sure people don't have to keep flocking South Africa or other places. South Africa is, I can't say has a certain level of required governance, a certain level of democracy, and a certain level of development, which can very possibly be acquired in other parts of Africa. Uganda can be as developed and as comfortable as South Africa, and so Ugandans will not have to leave as Uganda to come to South Africa, the same way it is with Cameroon and all these other African countries. So let's look at Africa as one Africa and look at the plight of our African brothers and sisters from different villages, call them countries, from Africa. If it's all right there, it is going to be all right here. But if it's not all right there, if it's trouble there, the spiral effect is going to affect South Africa.
Bobi Wine, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And good luck with 2021.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for watching this interview. And remember that in case you've just joined the conversation and in case you just found out about this interview, the interview will be available on the SABC News channel on YouTube. Goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day.
This is a message to the government, expressing what's exactly on the people's mind. Obulamu bwaffe na buli kitumalako eddembe lyaffe Uganda etambula edda mabega kituuse n'okutwetamya eggwanga lyaffe mulimba mutufuga bubi nnyo nammwe kale tetuganye mwalwana mu nsiko naye gw'omwana gwe wasanga nga tannazaalibwa kati naye yazaala nadda kino mukiŋŋambire muzeeyi abamutukako saba ne bazeeyi banne bamugambeko eno ensonga nkyamu nnyo gyalemeddeko kati eggwanga lyonna lyenyamidde bagambe yalinga demokulasi mwamubuluka kati yafuuka na hipokirisi bagambe yali fundamento change mwagizaala wakati mugifudde no change bagamba kyensongeza abalwanya kati mwazibukako namwe mukola biri ebyabali bakusaba nti constitution yaabwe togikwatako kubamwe